Hi. Hi.
Hi.
Okay, so let me open up your paper here, and this meeting is being recorded. So when we finish, I'll send you the link. Okay, so this is your paper, and so this is a good first draft. You say here, the significant difference between Zinn and Flynn is the view of American history. Zinn talks about the negative aspects of the history of settlement and the founding of the United States to a people's history of the United States. Flynn objected to this perception of Zinn and criticized him for intentionally describing American history negatively. Contrary to Zinn, Flynn tends to look positively at the history of settlement and the founding fathers of the United States. So I think Zinn at the beginning of the book, oh yeah, okay. Flynn criticizes Zinn for describing American history with theory than facts, and for looking at all American history through Marx's Communist Manifesto theory that the history of all history of existing societies is the history of class struggle. Is that that's a quote from Zinn or Flynn? That quote there. Where did you find? You put in quotation marks. Where did you find it?
I saw this on the Flynn's Flynn's
Essay.
articles.
Yeah. Oh, so okay.
Yeah.
Well, you can put that in. You can go. You can just you should go Flynn. And typically, what you do when there's a website, when you cite an article in a website, you give the paragraph number where the quote is located. So you count the paragraphs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You can and put the paragraph where that quote is located. He says Zinn describes white people's demons and native people as pure victims when dealing with the stories of natives and whites. In other words, he says Zinn's description is not neutral. He commented on Zinn's book as 800 pages of defamation against the United States. So I was going to ask when we started that, what was the, you say different perspectives. They have different perspectives. Another way to talk about perspectives is to say that they basically have different theoretical frameworks for understanding social evolution, social change, and who are the main actors in the evolution and change within society, and what are the main motivations or causes of their action of these social actors. And so you lay out, what Zinn's theoretical framework is for his analysis of society, analysis of reality, including our perception of the past, because what we have is our perceptions of the past, and which is interesting. And then what do you think is Flynn's theoretical framework, perspective, or lens? I think that Zinn uses the term lens, like the lens of a glass. What is the theoretical framework or lens that Flynn uses? Because we all use a theoretical framework, whether or not we are aware of our theoretical framework or explicitly aware of it, we still use it. We still use one. What do you think? How would you describe Flynn's theoretical framework?
I think Flynn's lens is like view of like the state, like government, or like how he wants to see the good point of United States.
I think I agree. I think if I were going to describe a label Flynn's theoretical lens or framework, it would be American positive American exceptionalism. That there's a claim made, particularly by people that really are conservative American nationalists, that the United States is exceptional. All countries are exceptional, sure, okay, in some ways, but America is exceptional in a positive way. Because of its, as reflected in the fact that it's so powerful and so influential around the world. And if it's so powerful and influential around the world, it's not primarily because of its military might, its nuclear weapons, because the Soviet Union had lots of nuclear weapons and missiles and military capability as well. So it's not military, it's America's attractiveness. America's attraction. Many people, maybe not everybody, but many people admire America around the whole world. And that's why, and that is an indicator that America is truly exceptional in a positive way. that America could not be so influential, could not be so admired around the world in many aspects, its politics, its culture, not to mention its economy, if we're not somehow positively exceptional. And this positive exceptionality has to do with many factors, but also certainly part of it would be the founding of the United States by Europeans, predominantly by English, who came to United States, what is today the United States, and brought their culture with them, and then improved upon it and changed it to make it even better. So they brought what they know, say, from Great Britain, and they had the revolution against British control, and they established it in the name of a republic, a federal republic with elections to elect the leaders, and including the chief executive, not some inherited king who inherits the position through family, but through choice of the republic. And this is the first time that this has happened in modern history, that you have elections of people that have the right to vote, and they choose an elected leader who then has to work with an elected Congress to govern the society, and this has to be part of any explanation of why, despite Zinn's portrayal of the United States, according to Flynn, how does Zinn portray the United States? The United States is all about exploitation, racism, imperialism, class conflict, colonialization, expropriating the property of the Indians, and the freedom of Africans brought as slaves. And on this foundation, the white racist imperialist slave republic was established, and that this is the foundation. According to Flynn, when you read Zinn's textbook, all of those great achievements of the United States that made America so admired around the world as the source, one of the major sources of its power is its soft power, is so admired, is not talked about, is not discussed at all in Zinn's book. And this, you can tell, this just infuriates Flynn, and it infuriates Flynn, I think not just because there was one book written by one guy who Flynn doesn't like, whose book he doesn't like. He starts off explaining at the beginning of his essay what really angers him. And what angers him is not that that Zinn wrote this book. What angers him is that Zinn, the followers of Zinn, in the form of college teachers, high school and college teachers, assign this book, make this book the most frequently used book in teaching about American history in the United States. Out of all the books that are available on American history, this book is the most popular one. So people like me, hundreds, maybe thousands of people like me, teachers and instructors, require their students, you, to read this book. So what is the problem with American academics, American universities, American intellectuals, that they do not want to emphasize or understand or focus on how America is so positively exceptional, that it is so influential around the whole world, but rather want to focus upon the dark side, the mistakes, the ugliness of America, instead of the greatness of America. And for Flynn, it's not just a matter of having pride in being an American. He says this is he describes this as being critically important for the world today. He doesn't come out and say that in his essay, but that's what he clearly implies, because there's one point in the book where, in the essay, in the Flynn essay, where he describes the great achievements of America. And great moments in American history, critical moments that define American behavior, American policy, American action in the world, and American explanation for what they do as Americans explain it to themselves and to the whole world, why they exist. And he cites, for example, 3 speeches. 2 of the speeches everybody knows about, or knows about in American history. George Washington, the first president of the United States who led the US Army in the war against the British for independence, he becomes first president, and he serves for just 2 terms, and he steps down involuntarily, quits after 2 terms as president. And he gives a last speech to the American people. The American Congress is called his farewell address, in which he gives his advice to the United States, the new United States. And this is somehow critically important for explaining America's role. And basically, what's also important in that speech is that George Washington warns Americans to stay out of great power politics in Europe. Don't get involved in making alliances and going to in diplomatic alliances with France or Britain. Focus on your affairs. Focus on developing America, expanding West. Don't get involved in entangling alliances. So don't do what the French, the Russians, the Prussians, the English, all those Austrians are doing. And then the other great speech that the president articulates to explain what America is for and what America is trying to do and why it's sacrificing what it's doing is Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. So after the Battle of Gettysburg, which was pretty much the turning point that the North was going to win this war. And it was pretty evident sooner or later the war was going to end, the North was going to win after that Gettysburg battle. And Abraham Lincoln gives his Gettysburg Address after the battle, and he explains why we're fighting this war, what it means. And then the third speech he puts in that same group with Washington and Lincoln is a speech by Ronald Reagan in I think it's 1986. Let me look up. I mentioned that in the previous class as well, and I should look this up now just to check on this. Let me go to Wikipedia. He mentions the speech. He references the speech by Ronald Reagan, the president from 1980 to 1988, before the Brandenburg Gate. When Ronald Reagan goes to Berlin, and he gives a speech there after he'd been in power for several years. And this is it. Yeah. Ronald, tear down this wall. Let me see, make sure you can see that. This is the speech that Flynn references. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, also known as the Berlin Wall speech, was a speech delivered by U.S. States President Ronald Reagan in West Berlin on June 12, 1987. He called for the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, to open the Berlin Line, which separated East and West Berlin since 1961. And the name is derived from the key line in the middle of the speech, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. So Ronald Reagan had been president for almost 7 years. He's coming to the end of his second term. And Gorbachev, and he became president in 1980. And he defeated Jimmy Carter in the election in 1980. And Jimmy Carter had come into office in 1976, after the Vietnam War was over and lost, after the Americans left Vietnam through an agreement negotiated by Richard Nixon, who maneuvered to get the Chinese to open relations with China, communist China, in a secret maneuver, secret diplomacy in early 1970, like 71, and used the renewed relations of U.S. with China to get pressure on Russia, to get Russia to pressure North Vietnam to compromise with the United States at the Paris Peace Treaty talks, the Paris Peace negotiations to stop the war in Vietnam in Paris. So the Americans looked like they were not defeated, so they wouldn't look so humiliated. So the Americans agree, they reach a peace agreement with North Vietnam, and they pull out American forces in 1973. And South Vietnam is still there. But by 1975, South Vietnam collapses, as does Cambodia and Laos under the communist movements there. And And so, it's pretty clear that, America lost that war. And after 56,000 dead American soldiers and many more wounded, and God knows how many Vietnamese casualties, the Americans failed. And Richard Nixon had, he had negotiated that agreement with North Vietnam, and then he gets reelected in 1972 in a landslide, in a big landslide election. But then he's forced to resign in 1974 because of his criminal behavior in Watergate and other scandals against his domestic political opponents, to try to make sure he gets reelected in 1972. And he gets reelected in a landslide, but then he's forced to resign. And this is all happening at the end of the Vietnam, before he resigns. The Vietnam War, by the way, is, causing turmoil and conflict in American society. We talked about how John F. Kennedy was murdered, and then Lyndon Johnson in 1964 became, he became president, and he got elected in 1964, and then he boosted America's involvement in Vietnam. And it became pretty clear after a few years that America was not winning this war, even though it's a very violent war. Despite America's power and strength, America's not winning. And the Americans like to believe that they're the good guys, that they always win. America is a bunch of winners. Good guys win, bad guys lose. Just like Hitler and the Germans lost World War II because they were the bad guys. And America won because we're the good guys. Now, oh my gosh, we lost this war. After all those soldiers and all that suffering, we lost this war. But Richard Nixon, had resigned into a second term, and was replaced with Gerald Ford. But I should just go back to a second. I mean, Americans were protesting. College students were protesting. College students and college professors were the main leaders, not the only ones, but they were one of the main groups supporting the protests against the Vietnam War beginning in the 1960s. College professors, universities, like Professor Howard Zinn, or Professor Gar Alpovitz, or Professor William Appleton Williams. These are all college university people, and the students who were leading the protests, and that some students would die. In 1970, we'll talk about this later, in the course. In 1970, there's protests at Kent State University, United States, when Richard Nixon orders the U.S. Army to invade into Cambodia to help destroy the Vietnamese reserve units that are attacking from Cambodia into South Vietnam and supplying. And there's protests, and the American soldiers, reserve soldiers, fire on the students and kill 4 students. About 45 minute drive from where my home is in Ohio, and so Nixon gets reelected despite his soldiers shooting on American protesters in a landslide, and then he has to resign because he's a criminal. And then Gerald Ford is president, and then when Gerald Ford is president, Vietnam collapses. The Democratic Party won't let him do what he wants to do to help the South Vietnam stay in power. They won't let him give more money, more weapons, more bombing, none of that. And then at the same time, communists begin to advance in Africa. The left-wing forces make advances in the newly independent countries in Angola and Mozambique from the Portuguese Empire. And then Jimmy Carter gets elected. And Jimmy Carter, he says, I'm not going to talk about containment anymore at all. I'm not going to talk about communism. I'm going to talk about human rights. We made a mistake in Vietnam. We're going to talk about human rights. And then finally, the communists seize power in Angola and Mozambique. They seize power in Nicaragua, in the Sandinista communists allied with Fidel Castro's Cuba, and communist insurgencies begin in El Salvador, and they pick up strength in Guatemala, and there's a communist government that takes power in Grenada with the help of the Cubans, and then of course the economy begins to go bad because the Arab countries that are allied with the Soviet Union in 1973, Egypt and Syria, they decide to launch their war against Israel to get back what they lost in 1967, in the 1967 war. And this causes the Arabs to embargo oil to the United States for supporting Israel. And this drives up the price of oil 4 times. So now you have oil shortages, weak inflation, economic inflation. And then on top of all of this, the Iranian Shah that the CIA put in power in 1953 is overthrown by the Islamists in Afghanistan, in Iran in 1978-79. And then they seize the American embassy personnel in Iran as hostage, and they hold those people for 444 days, and Carter can't get them out. And Carter and the US government is humiliated. They try a military mission, they fail. And then the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan in Christmas 1979. And there's another oil crisis when the Iran-Iraq war begins that Saddam Hussein began in 1980 by attacking Iran, which causes the price of oil to go up even more. So Ronald Reagan is saying this is all due to the weakness of Carter and the Democrats. These weak-willed people who don't have the will and determination to do what is necessary to meet the challenges to the United States in the world. And he wins. And there's a big upsurge in American nationalism. And Ronald Reagan doubles the American defense budget, restarts the Cold War, invades Grenada in 1983 at one point, and removes the pro-Cuban regime there. He escalates rhetoric against the Soviet Union, and then we come close at least once to an accidental conflict with the Soviet Union and the United States that we're finding about now more recently. And then Leonid Brezhnev, the old dictator in the Soviet Union, dies. He's replaced by another old man, Yuri Andropov, former head of the KGB, who lasts for a couple of years, and he dies. And then Konstantin Chernenko, another old man in the Soviet Union, becomes leader, and he dies after 10 months. And then Mikhail Gorbachev comes to power in 1985. And Mikhail Gorbachev starts reforming the Soviet Union. He starts perestroika and glasnost, they're called. And everybody becomes aware, wow, something's going on here in the Soviet Union. And Ronald Reagan knows something is going on. And then he goes to East Berlin and gives a speech at Brandenburg Gate. Where that's what Flynn is referring to, at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. And then 2 years later, the communism begins to end in Eastern Europe. There's elections in Poland in June of 1989. And then by November 1989, all the communist regimes, October, November, December 1989, all the communist regimes collapsed 2 years after the speech. And for people like Flynn, this person gets the credit for it. This Republican, conservative, nationalist American gets the credit for finally winning the Cold War by showing the will and determination at the Brandenburg Gate, it says here, right? To do what was necessary to win that battle, to finally win the Cold War. Gorbachev comes to power, and the wall comes down 2 years later after his vice president, George H.W. Bush, becomes president by defeating Michael Dukakis in 1988 elections. But he gets the credit. So for somebody like Flynn, this person is in the same category with Lincoln and Washington, right? And he asked, why doesn't Zinn talk about this achievement? He doesn't talk about this achievement, but clearly the assumption was that this person and America's will and determination, there were some mistakes, there were some fools like Jimmy Carter and Lyndon Johnson, but there were some American leaders relying upon traditional American values that saved you and me from the Soviet version, Russian version of Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, that was trying to conquer the world for totalitarianism. And in spite of, and this person did this because he rallied America, he called America to action, in spite of people like Howard Zinn, in spite of the New Left intellectuals and that emerged in opposition to the Vietnam War, in spite of people like Gar Alpovitz, who we talked about at the end of the book, in spite of William Appleman Williams and Gabriel Kolko and these other New Left historians and Howard Zinn. In spite of them describing and portraying America as a shameful country with a shameful history, because you see, those people, they've always been around, but they got a lot more attention when people are trying to understand what happened in Vietnam, what's going on there, how do we get involved? Why are we not winning? Why do we get involved in this war? If we're the good guys and we're for freedom, why are we why are the Vietnamese fighting us? Oh, maybe we're not for freedom. Maybe we've been lied to, we Americans watching the news and reading the newspapers. Maybe something's going on that we really don't understand. Maybe we are being fooled, brainwashed. Maybe we've always been doing evil things. Maybe this isn't the first time. If Vietnam was a mistake, maybe the Korean War was a mistake. Maybe dropping the atomic bomb on Japan twice in 1945 was a mistake. Maybe. And so people like them to start looking at the American history and start to say, maybe it's not the Soviet Union is the problem, and maybe it's America and European capitalist imperialism that's the problem. I mean, that's why the nationalist movements emerged in Vietnam and elsewhere, because of the French domination, which was brutally exploitive. The French weren't nice to the Vietnamese when they ruled over Vietnam. They squeezed them like a sponge to make as much money for the French companies as they could. Those people die in famines rather than feed them, even while those people were forced to grow rubber for French rubber tire companies. And America went to war to defend those people that collaborated with the French, the Catholics in Vietnam and the aristocrats, the landed old Yangban in Vietnam that collaborated with the French. And then so they start portraying a history of the world like Zinn's history. And so for people like now, I mean, I think you highlight in the paper, or other people highlight in the papers, that Zinn is saying, look, Americans already know how great America is. They learned that from the time they were born. They learn how great, American history is. But if you only find out how great, and you only hear about how great America is and how this great thing called America came to be by the actions of rich, powerful leaders, or powerful leaders like Abraham Lincoln or George Washington, you don't understand how it really became the country that has beneficial features to it. And that's not just because of economic wealth. It's not because rich, powerful men, white men, felt bad and gave human rights to everybody. That people had to organize, the poor and the weak had to organize and demand these changes happen, overcoming resistance from those groups that supported and defended the status quo. And that means struggle. That means social movements that fought against the rulers who portrayed the strugglers, the dissenters, as troublemakers, as anti-American, as not being patriotic, as threats to American values, and those people are as much about America, and those people emerged and became leaders because they had lots of support, because so many Americans were exploited and poor and weak and suffering. But all those things we take for granted today that people don't even think about, like, for example, women should have the right to vote. 200 years ago, in 1821, most people would have thought that's ridiculous. You can't give women the right to vote. It's like giving children the right to vote. Would you give a 12-year-old child the right to vote? No. Well, then you also can't give a woman the right to vote because she's like a child in her head. That's obvious. No. Well, now we take it for granted. Sure, women should have the right to vote. How did that change happen? Why did that change happen? It wasn't just because rich, powerful men said, oh, I feel bad. I think we should give women the right to vote. Society changed. There was technological, economic progress and development that produced a situation where women could get jobs in factories. You didn't need to marry a man who was a farmer to make babies to take care of you, because when you get old, because you get a job in a factory, or you get a job as a secretary. So there was industrialization, and there was the creation of a working urban class. Yeah, but those people were exploited too. But it required organizers and dissidents who could express and articulate and lead the struggle to organize these unhappy people who are emerging to make demands that we all take for granted today, right? That, like, women should have the right to vote. And yeah, there had to be some sympathy among rich, powerful white men. And there was, I mean, Lyndon Johnson was sympathetic to the labor rights movement, sympathetic to the civil rights movement, partly because of the Cold War, right? The Americans were in competition with the Soviet Union for world influence. And the Soviet Union is always saying, look how Americans treat Black people. Look how they treat Hispanic people. Look how racist America is. So there was that element of it, but America responded. Americans responded, and they changed that, and they changed the system. But there was, it was because they were challenged by the Soviet Union, the communist Soviet Union, Zinn emphasizes. And the challenge of communism is what motivates the Americans to overcome the modern, in the 20th century, American rich, powerful white people to overcome the weaknesses that they face, or to be sympathetic to human rights demands. And you see right now how Joe Biden is saying, we have to have more developed social welfare policies, because how are we going to compete with China? China, the People's Republic of China, under the Communist Party of China. So, I mean, and a lot of terrible things were done in the name of the Cold War. So this is what Zinn's trying to highlight, that we need to understand the reasons why, true reasons why America developed and changed. It's not because rich, powerful white men did us all favors over the course of history, right? It was conflict, struggle, and both at a global level and at a local level, and often interacting with each other. And that motivated this change and brought about these changes. But from Flynn's point of view, that's not enough. You have to tell me, why is America so admired all over the world? And clearly it's because there's something about the American model that's exceptionally attractive to Koreans, to Japanese, to Germans, to French. I mean, it can't just be because America's brutal and rich. And you don't get that sense at all from the Zinn book. And we now have new challenges. We have Islamic militants challenging America's friends in the Middle East. We have communist China now challenging America's influence as the most powerful democratic capitalist country in the world. We have the People's Republic of China under the Communist Party of China. And we need to mobilize the American people to meet these new challenges, because if you don't fight for your freedom, Flynn says, if you don't defend it, you'll lose it. But Zinn makes you ashamed to be an American when you read that book. It undermines your national morale. Okay, do you have any questions? If you don't know, like I highlighted here in my comments, if you don't know about how, how America, the history of exploitation and suffering of marginalized people, Black people, Hispanic people, then you might look at their problems today, where they have higher crime, higher poverty, higher drug use, higher violence, as evidence of the fact that they're sick in the head. There's something, it's their fault, they're bad. And that's another thing that Zinn wants to highlight, that if you don't understand the history that produced people, to make people the way they are, and anybody can make a baby. Any person who, even if they're mentally ill or criminal because of their abuse, because most people that are criminals themselves have been abused when they were children, and they were abused before them. If you don't understand this, you don't know this history of exploitation and abuse of Black, brown, indigenous people, you're likely to say, well, those people, it's their culture, they're lazy, they're bad, they don't want to work, they like living like garbage, they're just bad people. Right? Because of course we know Columbus and Washington and Lincoln, and they did all these great things. Okay, do you have any questions?
So do I have to change my papers or?
No, I mean, you can do whatever you want. I mean, I want you to think about these things, because I want you, that's the purpose of doing these drafts, is because it's an opportunity to talk and think more. So, it's a good draft. It's a good first draft. Okay. Okay, that's it then. And I'll send you the recording to this link. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So that's it. Bye.
Bye.